Coffee Sketch Podcast is our take on the intersection of old tech and new tech, the space between the traditional practice of the hand-drawn sketch that has been performed by architects and designers for centuries, and the modern-day use of the hashtag as a representation of a sentiment or a movement. Hey Jamie, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing, Kurt?
Amped. If you can't tell.
Yeah, it's all the shaking. The shaking. Yeah. It's like a bobblehead.
I've never owned a bobblehead. I've always wanted one, like a sports,
like a 3D version of yourself, like bobblehead. You're like, bing.
That would be cool. Actually, I'd be cool with that. I don't know if we're famous enough for that sort of thing yet. No. I think I'm more amped because of the numerous cups of coffee.
Right. Exactly.
So,
what is in the cup? Let's just get straight to it.
So yeah, let's go. So it's
cut to the chase.
I'm rocking my Joel mug, which we got to have that guy back.
Yeah,
he's been producing some very nice sketches in color. Where does he find the time? Well, anyway, we'll find out because we'll have to have him back and ask him that question.
No words.
Actually, have been on sort of inspired by Jamie as far as his what's the word? Sweet tooth for Starbucks roasts.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah.
And so I've so mixed it up a little bit. So I went and got the Yukon roast. I don't know what they call it. It's called Yukon. It's got a big bear on the outside.
Got a big bear because
Pacific Northwest flavors.
Okay.
That's what I'm drinking. It's not bad. I like it. It's probably strong.
It seems like it's working. Whatever.
How it was very difficult this last purchase because it was sitting right next to the Guatemalan bean, and it had the big quetzal on the front, and I was like, oh, I got to buy my Guatemalan beans.
Well, and Mom's coming to visit, so
yeah. Well, that's a good point. I should go back.
Yeah, Jamie helps with the purchase.
That's right. I'm running low. Anyway, so
all the vacation travelers.
Yeah, so fam's coming into town. My brother, his wife, 2 kids, and my mom, all at once in Michigan. Although they started out their trip, Charlie and the wife and kids went east to see Mom. Then they went to Charlie's 20-year college reunion in Pennsylvania, which they're leaving today to go back east. And then they will be flying here to Michigan.
Oh, wow.
And then back to California. So yeah, it's a 2-week whirlwind with a 5 and a 3-year-old. And then a mom. I won't disclose my mother's age.
And grandma, right?
And grandma.
Yeah, so she
mom, grandma.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Abuela. Abuelita.
Well, I didn't know like what she prefers to be called. So
probably abuelita.
Okay.
En español, por favor. Yeah. So yeah, we'll have to
my mom is a nanny, so
nanny.
Like she goes by nanny. So
that's a nice one.
Yeah.
It is actually, it's kind of fun to know different. There are a lot of grandma nicknames, like Danielle's grandma is Gran or Grin. Sometimes they call her Grin, which is kind of funny, endearing. I don't know. It's like you have to be there kind of thing. You have to know the person, I suppose. So anyway, I'm sure our listeners, hopefully they can all, but we should engage with them and ask our listeners what they call their grandmother.
Especially since we do have some listeners who are like in, different parts of the world too.
Yeah.
It's always, like mine is definitely, my mom's mom was nanny. So, and I learned that it's sort of a very Irish kind of thing. So that's where that comes from. But
And then so I'll put this out there, since we don't do a whole lot of this, like, hey, reach back out to us, fans,
Right.
listeners. I'll call them listeners. I don't know if I want to call them fans. I don't want to presume that.
No, yeah, there's no presumption. We're not presumptive at
But
all.
but probably the best way to react
especially after our discussion, like totally caffeinated before we even started this. So
that's right. That's
no
right.
presumption.
That's right. Right. That's exactly. Humility is the name of the game. So, but the best way to probably respond would be on Twitter. I'm going to say my social media game is somewhat subpar, and Jamie's is better, way better than mine. And so if you shoot a message to Coffee Sketch on Twitter, Jamie will respond quickly. Kurt will maybe respond slowly.
Kurt is, he is picking up. There are moments where like there's a flurry.
I know, right?
You hit a couple topics, and Kurt is right there. Like,
that's right. Thanks.
On point. So
yeah. So what about you? What are you drinking?
Well,
what's amping Jamie up?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's like it was funny. You definitely know me. So I saw this sort of limited edition Starbucks thing while I was getting some groceries, and
could not resist.
I didn't resist because it was like, I was like, oh, that one's new, and it sounded different, and I knew I needed to get some coffee. But it's vanilla. It's like a Madagascar vanilla and honey. Starbucks. Never seen it before. And it is. I mean, when you said sweet tooth, it's like, it's so funny. I mean, because it really is. It's a medium roast, but it has a real sort of sweet flavor to it. So, but not like a milk chocolatey kind of sweetness. You can still get the coffee roast through. It's more of the honey, I think, that's sort of coming through. But the vanilla is real subtle. So I like it. Right on. And it definitely has got the caffeine. So.
I should see if I could find some of that that gets the caffeine. Not to forget about our local friends at Rootless here in Flint. The roaster, the install of the roaster is now done.
Ooh.
It should be done by now. We had
a little. Do you get to like push the button? Like,
I don't know if they have buttons.
Okay.
But you mean as far as like the first fire up? Like,
the first fire up. I mean, like, dude, you have a podcast. You help them get the roaster. Permit process.
Yeah, the lengthy permit process. It was actually kind of
This is the non-pretentious part of design where you're just like, can I push the button?
I'm just happy that it's complete. And we give a shout out to Sean Murray from Rootless, who just got married.
Oh, sweet.
A week or two ago, I think. Yeah. I think he's on his honeymoon now, celebrating not roasting coffee. So yeah, hopefully he listens, and I'll have to remind him, hey, why don't you listen to 99, episode 99, if you only listen to one. So yeah, that was it's nice to see something small task. So the excitement was there. I bumped into him before his wedding, and he said that the new machine is way faster, so what we're expecting is more Rootless coffee to people who want it. That's the big reason there. And yeah, so it's very cool. So anywho, this is 99, episode 99. We are almost there. We're at the precipice.
We will make no homages to Kurt's fanboy podcasting.
It didn't even cross my mind.
It totally crossed your mind.
It did cross my mind. 99% invisible.
Yes.
They have way more than 99 episodes. But you got to start somewhere.
Goals.
Hashtag goals. Is that how you use it? Hashtag.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, so for today though, we were going to talk about, which is going to be fun, I think, is a little bit of a recap. Is Jamie graciously joined my studio's final review, and also got to join a friend of ours. Actually, we should, for those that are listening, we'll talk about it more. But Illya Azaroff, FAIA, is a teacher, also a faculty at City College, New York, right? And also running for a director at large at AIA National. So we should endorse a friend, a colleague, and so yeah. So that's my ringing endorsement of Illya, a talented man, smart man, passionate about resiliency, which I think you're going to talk about as far as the studio project.
Somebody who was almost on like an early version of the podcast.
We had some technical difficulty.
Yeah, he was sort of on the cutting room floor of that episode. But yeah, if you go back to when Kurt and I did our first foray into
coffee sketch in the wild
at the Manil Drawing Institute in Houston, Illya was actually with us for that sort of tour, and that was sort of a fun day of barbecue and and architecture in Houston, and coffee sketch podcasting in the wild. Yes,
it was good. And maybe I'll have to go back to the archives and see if I can resurrect some bits and pieces for everyone, and an outtake, something we can cobble in using technology, right?
Right, yeah, and in Kurt's spare time.
So. Yeah, well, yeah, working and teaching anyway, so that's why it was, maybe we're a little past the day of presentations, but it was fun. We got Jamie, so I'll start with my class, right? So real quick, we could talk about the class that I worked on, which is called Comprehensive Design at Lawrence Tech. And the format was so Jamie joined the graduate section. So we run this class for undergraduates and graduates in 2 different tracks, but the format is basically the same as far as the project and the deliverables that we're trying to get them to pursue. So it's comprehensive. So we're trying to ask them not only for the architectural, but mechanical and systems, and understanding how to integrate these things together. A little bit of energy modeling, and hopefully that doesn't mean that it was poorly done, right?
No.
The little hiccup.
That was just
but so
a poorly placed hiccup describing the student's work. Yes.
So here, let's see. Let me share screen real quick, and I hope I have the right window open. I do. Oops.
As you're pulling that up, I was just going to say thank you again for the opportunity to do it. I haven't taught in a little while, but have taught in the past, and then had the opportunity to sit in on reviews at University of Texas here in Austin several times for several years, but haven't done it in a little while. And so this was a welcome opportunity to do that.
I just put an arrow next to Jamie. It's tiny. I'll put another arrow next to Kurt. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, then you'll see our little arrows of people to not forget the shout out. But yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for joining. And so at Lawrence Tech, actually, just so everyone knows, that the graduate architecture program it can be taken completely online. So I think it's easily the first of its kind, and still one of few that actually exist for an architecture program. And so being online, we have students kind of from all over the place, sometimes internationally as well. And so coordinating calendars and schedules can be a little challenging, but so we took advantage of this online nature and had the presentations via Zoom. And now that everybody is 100% Zoom experts, I invited Jane to come join the crits, and also Kevin down here in the corner from the Archimarathon YouTube channel and Archimarathon website and Discord, and named Archimarathon is Kevin. And he's from Australia. And so that was a lot of fun. It was morning. It was actually the future for him. So it was the morning after the evening for us over here stateside. So anyway, so this is the little screen of sort of the group. We kind of broke it out. Let me get out to actually, we'll jump into Jamie's sketch because it was more, where did it go? I think it's right here. Oh no. I'm having a technical difficulty. Down here.
There it is, right there.
So
yeah.
So the project, there was 2 projects, although in my section we only focused on one, which was a urban vertical farm project, which so the students had to take a site in Detroit, in the Eastern Market area of Detroit, which is a very rich and vibrant neighborhood, and sort of home to the Eastern Market, which is kind of it's a farmer's market, it's a bazaar, it's got a lot of roots in the city as far as being a sort of open air public space to sell things, primarily like a farmer's market style. And so the vertical farm program was kind of built to support the Eastern Market adjacent to the site, and then think in a more, sort of forward thinking sustainability, maybe net zero fashion, to try and create a little more on-site energy production, also food and sort of closed loop regenerative food production too. So that was kind of the big ask, right? It was definitely a big program, a very complex program with systems, parking, community benefits, things, social aspects. And so the students had some like sort of ups and downs throughout the semester, being online as well, trying to like wrestle with the program and meet each other and with the faculty online. And so anyway, that's kind of the background. And so Jamie got to sit in for 6 students for the session, and actually which was, it was total serendipity. I think this was not a planned thing at all, but it just so happened, and that's why we're talking about it, is that Jamie was being on Zoom. Jamie was able to make some sketches and use them in critique with one, not more than one of the, or was it just one or two of the students, as we were trying to like draw out the concept from this to maybe help the student push it maybe just a bit farther. So what are your thoughts then, Jamie? Enough of me.
No, I think it was, I liked the idea of the program and thinking about a place like Detroit, and which has a rich built history, but then also has some really interesting sustainability efforts and then challenges. And I think that the program, as you like aptly described it, it's a challenging one that probably had multiple points for the students to engage it, both from a pure design and program and architecture, historical precedent, site context, but at the same time, sort of systems of the building, and trying to understand those in relationship to their own work, but then also trying to make a foray into sort of closing the loop and thinking about how we're designing buildings for the future where there is some regenerative process. And then I think the part that sort of I loved about the project was this sort of idea of bringing the social aspect of food and people and community and place into the project. And I think that ended up being really the spot where you could see the students who really rose to the occasion and really challenged themselves, because I think the other parts are a little bit nuts and bolts, and you can certainly, and I say nuts and bolts as if it's something that's easy, and I don't mean that at all, but nuts and bolts where it's things that are familiar. I think that there's those aspects of design through a studio education are things that you've encountered before. It's a new project, which is always new challenges, but I think layering on top of it this idea of resilience related to community and to people, like to the actual potential occupants, I think is something that we need to be, all of us as designers and people just in general need to be thinking about. So I liked that aspect and really enjoyed the conversations with the students where they were posing questions about what this building would feel like to the community. Mm-hmm. And how it would work and how one would kind of occupy it and how their designs and the architecture influenced that and where their challenges were. I think the students who were taking it to a whole nother level for themselves really looked at those aspects of community and really tried to figure out, how do I engage it and how, and the questions that they sort of posed in that, I think were the spots that seemed to be most exciting. I mean, and the ones who were the images that we have on the screen, one of the sketches, it was clear the student was really interested in this sort of community aspect of things. And they were really trying to understand how their building fit into the context of place. And I think they were struggling, honestly, with how do you put a building on this particular site, connect it to the community and the context and the precedent. There's other markets sort of and market type buildings in the area, and then make it at the same time a closed loop building. And I think that process of turning it into a closed loop, it was almost like a short circuit for them. And there were aspects of the architecture that they started to explore. And so we were having this very interesting discussion about the building as an object, as a closed loop system, and then in their particular design, the disconnect to the community. And that was a missed opportunity. And so there were some aspects of that were particularly interesting. And they weren't upset about it. It was like you could see that was where they were really struggling with those kind of competing ideas or perceived competing ideas for themselves as a designer, which that's part of the process. So as much as it's a critique, it's also a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a lot of fun. And then the fact that Kevin was there as well, I think that his input was fantastic, and it helped me really kind of think through a lot of the precedents that he was trying to allude to for the students. There was an interesting discussion of sort of Richard Rogers and the Pompidou Center. Mm-hmm. And so on one of the projects, and there were some other kind of aspects of that were wonderfully challenging for me to kind of think, okay, historically, these are good precedent studies. What are some other ones that have happened? And his perspective as a practitioner and educator and whatnot in Australia, I think was great.
Yeah, I was sort of giddy in getting both of you into the same room at the same time, or the same Zoom room, because it was interesting to see the two of you kind of riff a little bit off each other. We even got Kevin sketching and screen sharing to sort of, both of you were both kind of right on the same page in a lot of the conversation with some of the students in trying to and I'd like to commend both of you and thank you for being able to sort of, with very, very brief introduction to the project, get into the idea and also maybe less for Kevin, but I think you've been to Detroit. Mm-hmm. Briefly, and so trying to quickly sort of wrap your heads around the locality, the familiarity of place in interconnection. But yeah, so it is very helpful, and I think the conversations I hope will help develop the students to think. It's tough, right, to try and do in this particular course too, trying to do all of it in 16 weeks as far as architectural site analysis, energy, some concepts on energy modeling and calculations, then structures and enclosure and envelope. And then at the end of the semester, they get 10 minutes to present it all, and then have 10 or 10 or 15 minutes of feedback. And that's and then that's like the capstone of the semester. But yeah, there was one, yeah, you pointed out the one aspect which was interesting is that because of the program is that the building was very much like a machine. It was this production center of sort of growing food, composting food, extracting energy from the food through a biodigester, capturing rainwater, capturing solar, also having a restaurant on site, community educational spaces, and sort of walk. So turning the building into sort of sometimes a machine, sometimes an educational facility for talk about the functions that are going on inside the building. And then having it to sort of address that ground plane, because it was multi-story, high density sort of square footage, I think it was like 100 and something thousand square feet.
Well, and I think that was some of the more interesting discussions we had on more than one project, some of which is sketched here too, is this idea of that engagement at the street. And like I said, with the one student who was sort of challenged with the idea of this building as an object in a machine that was sort of a self-referential sort of closed loop system with energy and technology and whatnot, it almost became fortress-like. And I don't think that was their intention, and they were sort of struggling with that. And then others really had some opportunities to really engage with the street really interestingly, and were conscious of how certain corners and certain facades of their building were sort of natural axes to other aspects of the community, and creating design opportunities at the ground plane where you're playing with scale and you're playing with cover and you're allowing some transparency to see sort of that activity, even if you're not engaging with the building. All those things were really kind of rich discussions. And what was interesting to me, and I think Kevin pointed it out initially, and then as you said, I'm sort of piggybacking off of it a little bit, but this idea of you come up with one or two really strong design moves, sort of one or two really strong approaches to your project. And in doing that, you sort of set up a grid and set up a system for your building, both structurally, but also sort of systematically, how the building's going to work, both with people in it, but also sort of systems in it. And the projects that were most successful were the ones that found that opportunity to kind of set up an organizing system, both structurally as well as systematically, and then developed their concept from that, but didn't try and reinvent it all the way through. They sort of settled on the grid, for instance, like I think that was how Kevin initially brought it up, was this idea. It was someone was working through kind of a heavy timber building, and Kevin kind of pointed out this kind of concept of, well, heavy timber, it's the structure and there's an expression of that structure that you want to see. And from the exterior, there were some expressions of that structure. But then when you got to the interior, there was a lot of effort in sort of the iterative process of that person's design where they were covering up that structure. And not realizing that the opportunity when you got to the inside to design in section was exploring and expressing that structure. And what does that structure kind of give you to influence the design moves moving forward? And so it was sort of, I made the comment, that one rendered hallway that you have right there, where you have these observation rooms to different processes of the building. It's great that you're thinking about the processes of the building, but you're missing the opportunity in that hallway to have the right scale to express that structure, and that structure is really evident in that space, and there's a uniformity of the structure, that repetition of elements is actually kind of a nice design move. And so it was great to have a co-juror who was thinking along similar lines or was having a similar impression, which I think speaks to the strength of some of the projects. When jurors sort of respond to things in a way where we're really kind of on the same page and we're talking about the same things, it's because the project's strong. So I think overall, I mean, most of the projects, Kurt, were really strong. I think it was a really good, really great discussion, really great conversation.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
I like that he sketched with me. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a benefit. It's as far as people may think, oh, having to run a whole curriculum online, but if you can turn the camera, so to speak, or the lens, right, and use the zoom to your advantage, and being able to screen share sketches or throw a sketch on your camera or use the screen. But yeah, no, thanks for that compliment. I mean, we still on the faculty side, we're kind of constantly tinkering with the comp design class and taking all this stuff to try and continue to improve it, and always with the back of our mind intention having to do the NAB accreditation, which is the National Association of Architecture Board. I'm probably butchering the acronym, but it's basically
accrediting boards. Yes,
accrediting board, right? Yes, it's our what gives architecture schools the accreditation to produce future architects.
Seal of approval, so to speak.
Yeah, so comp design is definitely one that is under that microscope. And actually, I mean, it might be a good time to segue to the Illya's class, because I had a thought, and it'll come back to me. I know when we share, let me share a screenshot from that session, and I'll have more questions because I was not able to attend. Let's see, which one do I want to use? I'll start with this, and I'm going to switch to a different view because it's a little less grainy, but hold on a sec here. Let's see, probably start with this. Okay. So for you and for our YouTube viewers, hopefully could see this, and we'll switch away from this being a little grainy. But so for Illya's class, it sounds like, based on your hashtags and sort of what I saw online, is that Illya is a big proponent for resiliency, resilient design strategies. I mean, he does it in practice for people around the world. And so he's pushing this agenda in the studio, it sounds like, and it looks like they focused on a site area in the Bronx. And so let me actually, since this is a little grainy, I'll switch to this one, which was a view that Illya posted, and it looks like it was one of his students. Hopefully, I don't know if you sat in on this one. So yeah, why don't you give us the recap, and then we'll see if there was. I'll come back to the thought I had before.
Yeah, no, it's. I think that So after Kurt's review, I ended up a couple of days later had the opportunity to sit in on an evening review in New York City. So of course, also via Zoom. But yeah, Illya invited me, and it was great, wonderful opportunity. Again, there was several other jurors from different spots, mostly kind of in the New York kind of East Coast area. But I think that the intriguing part, aside from just the opportunity to hang out with Illya and meet some of his students, was I was very interested because, having just done yours, where sort of resilience and this sort of closed loop sort of systems approach was really evident in your students' work, I was kind of curious to see how another studio across the country was kind of tackling similar concepts. And so the projects there were centered in, the students were broken into smaller teams, smaller groups, where they were analyzing. So there was a lot of site analysis, and then trying to analyze those particular sites with resiliency goals in mind. I think the difference between the way that your studio was organized was Illya kind of front loaded a lot of resilience and systems education related to sort of design moves and case studies and precedents and sort of more cutting edge sort of analysis tools, where probably one of the primary objectives was sort of looking at site responses and challenging sites within sort of the New York, Manhattan, Bronx, the boroughs kind of area. So there was a couple different challenging sites. The students were broken up into where each of these groups was analyzing those particular sites. And a program developed out of that for each of the sites. So there wasn't necessarily programming that was across the board, where your project had a really, really rich program. This one, the programs were a little bit less rich, but the site analysis was, and the efforts in that were kind of a little bit differently. So it did different project model.
What was sorry to
no.
So what year or what year or grade class, whatever you want to call it, were these?
Same level. Same,
oh, like,
yeah. So senior level.
Oh, cool. And I like the idea of the emergent program, like the program emerging from the result of the site analysis. I think that's speaks to a lot of resilient strategies, right? Because, like, I mean, there's the global or the big picture, right? Is like, do you plunk down a building anywhere that zoning allows because you can,
right?
Or does this from a environmental or energy standpoint, does the site inform what should be there, right? It's not I want to put this there, but like, no, this is what needs to happen here.
Yeah, and I think that ended up being a little bit of a challenge for some of the students, because there was
no constraint.
There wasn't as much of a constraint in terms of sort of who's developing. You really didn't have a client who was written into the program. And so they're sort of developing their own clients in a sense. And though some of them were really adept at it and took the analysis of, okay, what can the floor area ratio be in this area and for this particular site, and what are the adjacencies, and what's the resilient response to. There were a lot of these sites also had a water component. You're working in New York City, you're in a coastal environment. The sea level rise is a real thing. And so there was some aspects of that influenced the designs, and part of that sort of future programming, where you're sort of thinking through how would this building evolve over time. So some students were much more adept at that, and kind of took a moment to really kind of think through how the influence of some of those kind of client decisions affected their own design. So they kind of, they instilled some rules upon themselves, which I think was a good move. But the sea level rise aspect of it for the projects was, I think there was two different sites that I looked at, and one that was really on the water, and then the other one had the one in the Bronx was also a waterfront site, but was a little bit more of a linear site where you could set the building back and have it not necessarily as affected. And so there was between the two different groups that I ended up reviewing, kind of different challenges that the students were dealing with. The Bronx site, there was an excellent discussion about sort of context of the street. And interestingly, a lot of the students were in that particular one were trying to understand the neighborhood that they were working in. And I guess unlike your students really went to that neighborhood and really spent a lot of time there. And that, I think, really informed their projects in terms of how they developed their program. So that was really, I thought, really rich discussions that kind of came out of that. But then each student developed their own project. So they worked as a team to do the analysis part, but then each one took a project from start to finish and then presented it that way for the reviewers.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the art comp design similar in that the beginning of the semester they do some group work for site and precedents, and they kind of break it up. Some do code analysis, program, kind of all that stuff, and then move on into their individual. So that sounds like a similarity. And then the one thing that is a difference is that, like you said, is being in our case, the online program, they can't, unless they're in Michigan, you're
Right.
taking this course, can't necessarily visit the site, or maybe not everybody, right? Some may and some may not. So they have to rely on the information we give them and whatever they can gather from other sources. So yeah, and I think understanding site by being there is definitely one aspect of any design project in school or in the real world that really helps to inform the result.
Right.
And so it can't always provide that in the school setting, for us at least, but when they get out into practice, they can
I,
they can engage in that
yeah,
component of it.
yeah. The other thing too that was a little different. Yours, you did have an engineer kind of in the review that with Kevin and I, and she was great in terms of talking through some systems processes. But for Ilya's, I got the opportunity to review with a landscape architect, and she was fantastic because she was very familiar with the site, and not necessarily where she had been reviewing the students' work before, but she was very familiar with those areas of New York, and the coastal response and the coastal challenges of dealing on some of those sites. And so she had some really fantastic probing questions for the students, and then told them where they were being really particularly inventive, or if they were just flat out just not making the right considerations.
Right.
And it was, and I think that was the thing there. Each of the sites were effectively like brownfield sites.
Mhm.
So they were locations that would probably have a lot of cleanup and things like that, kind of underutilized parcels, but were ones that across the board, all the students were really trying to challenge themselves to find a site response that linked it to the programs that they came up with, so that there was sort of a living building kind of component. And that's like the image you have there on the screen, but also that there was an opportunity for the community to engage the site, even if they weren't necessarily engaging with the program of the building, so that the site became a bit of an amenity for the community. And I think they're the students who really thought through their program development and had a strong kind of ethic to how that got developed, those were certainly more successful. And those that struggled with kind of how do I understand this community that's adjacent to my site, or that would use this building, you could see that their site response was a little bit more formulaic.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting, actually, as a sort of a segue back to our class and some of the conversation that came up between you and Kevin in that sort of, it was more than once the idea of like how the building engages that streetscape. But I think the angle here, like from a resiliency standpoint, is that most coastal flood prone areas, this response is going to have to be a sort of sacrificial ground floor, which then lifts the building up above that existing sidewalk level, or say the bulk of the inhabitable space, interior space of the building. So then vacating the ground floor a little bit to being a more public open space that could also flood. But then in our case, I suppose if the student said that they were attempting a future proposal, they might have gotten away. But then it creates an interesting void almost of a public presence to the building, because it's not necessarily touching the ground. So that's what happened in our review. in the Detroit project was
That's-
certain students
what-
like didn't know how to connect it down.
Right.
And
so
so
the landscape architect's comments were really poignant, because there was these sort of opportunities where there was one in particular where she was asking the student, like, okay, you have this site plan. So I'm in a taxi, and I get out of the taxi or my Uber, and I'm at the edge of your site. Where do I go next? And sort of this, like, walk me through your site. And so, like, it was that sort of really kind of trying to occupy this space. And like you say, this, in some cases, sacrificial ground plane, or were there opportunities for berms and retention features that really dealt with this concept of water and flooding and sea level rise? And how do you design that into an overall site response? It was really interesting. So I learned a lot as well.
yeah, cool. Yeah, it was also, like you mentioned, thanks for reminding me, there we had an engineer, and it was she was a late addition to our group, and luckily we got her. There was one big precedent vertical farm project that we looked at that it was an actual, did actually get built, and she was the engineer, or one of the team that did the engineering work on that vertical farm, which I can't remember where it was, but so it was nice to have her perspective from the technical standpoint. And yeah, so I think, because I could keep going. There's a whole lot. We might have to do this, do something again, talk about the studio aspects, but hopefully in the fall, I've been assigned to a studio that is going to go start to finish as group project, which will be a first for me. So they break into groups, and then they will develop an entire project. And this fall studio is the precursor to the comp design spring. So these students will be the fall, and then they move into comp in the spring. So I will most likely have engagement with them for the whole school year. So hopefully we can do something virtually where we can get you in again, and maybe we can get Illya if he's not too busy.
Yeah, no, that's no, I think that would be great. I'd love to come back. And thanks for bringing this one up as this episode. I think this was a great way to tie both of those experiences for me, but I think for both of us to talk a little bit about sort of process and discussion. I think it's definitely something that's akin to the podcast. So